Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 42nd episode of Tech Life Skills with Tanmay. My name is Tanmay Bakshi. Thank you very much for joining today. And of course, Tech Life Skills is the name of this series. And while technology really is a fundamental life skill, in my opinion, actually learning about technology is really just one part of the equation. Now, from there, actually learning all of the skills apart from technology, which are important in actually becoming the kind of person that can apply that tech, is the other half of the challenge. Now, that's exactly why today I am so excited to take a bit of a break from technology, actually. Instead, we're going to talk about something that, for a lot of people, is just an enigma, and that is the hiring process. So, in the past, sometimes I've almost, I guess, criticized in a way that, big tech companies, recruit new developers and how that's overfitting new candidates to be very good at, passing interviews, but not necessarily that great at, well, actually solving problems with with technology and working. And so today I want to delve deep into this world with our special guest, Bridget King. Now, Bridget is a talent acquisition manager for early professional hiring at IBM. And she's going to be sharing some of her tips and tricks for all the candidates out there as to how you can distinguish yourself and also what you shouldn't be doing as well. Now, I've worked with Bridget myself before, and she is really passionate about the work that she does. And you can really tell because that then translates to having that, desire to share that knowledge with others as well. And so, without any further ado, let's go ahead and welcome Bridget to the show. Hi, Bridget, how are you?
Hi, Tammy. I'm good, thanks. Happy to be here today.
Thank you very much. It's great to have you on the show. Now, of course, though,
Yeah.
I would like to, start off pretty fundamental. Let's start off with a quick introduction, maybe. Would you like to sort of tell people a little bit more about
Yeah.
what you do and why you're so passionate
Yeah.
about it?
Let's do it. Sure. So, hi, everyone. Bridget King. I'm a talent acquisition manager, as Tammy mentioned, at IBM for our North America hiring. So, we hire both across the US and Canada. Thousands of interns and new grads every year join us at IBM. So, my team is responsible for running our intern program, some of our early ID hiring, and many more different hiring programs. So we receive thousands and thousands of applications every year, and I've seen some of the best to some of the worst. So I'm happy to discuss this with you, Tamnay, because I know your audience is really passionate about tech and applying that to a career.
Thank you very much. I'm really looking forward to hearing from you. I know I'm going to learn a lot today because usually, I'm on the pretty technical end of things. So now I'm going to get
Other
to,
side.
yeah,
Yeah.
I'm going to get to take a look at your side of the story as well. So now, of
Cool.
course, I know that, working in recruitment, I'm sure that you get a lot of, LinkedIn connection requests, a lot of in-mails on LinkedIn, and you're just getting a lot of
Yeah.
communication, right? It's a fire hose
It's a
and it's just
lot.
a lot coming through, right?
Yeah.
So what I
Yeah.
want to know is what about a certain message that someone sends, or what about what they communicate actually makes them stand out? Like if you take a look at the curve, and most people are sort of average, some people are way below average, some people are way above average. What
Yeah.
sort of separates the ones that are above average from just the vast majority of messages that you're getting every single day?
Yeah, that's a great question, Tammy. I think I looked at my inbox on LinkedIn before I got on today, and I have 2,784 pending
Wow.
requests. So it is overwhelming. And I would say about on average, we could receive anywhere from 50 to 100 LinkedIn friend requests a day, right?
Hmm.
In mails, connections. So the main thing is really personalizing that connection request, right? So if I don't know you and there's no personal message, the chances of me accepting are very, very slim.
Hmm.
So what do I mean by a personal message? So instead of just clicking, add the person to your LinkedIn, you can have the option to send that custom message. And that's when you really can put in there, why are you wanting to connect with that recruiter or that hiring manager or that person? And if your request is, hey, I'd love to connect so you can review my profile and let me know if I'm a fit for any jobs, that's a big no-no on my side. And that's because you're asking me to do the work. And that shows me that you really haven't put in the effort, right?
Hmm.
So standing out for me is, for example, if I'm speaking at a conference or, on this show, for example, and I see, hey, I really enjoyed, listening to your talk this morning. Can we still stay connected? Okay, great. No problem. Now that I say that, I'm sure I'm going to be slammed with those messages. But, or I've been connecting with a bunch of people at IBM. I've had 10 different coffee chats, and I'd love to, take it to that next level and see, what you have to say about it. So it's really personalizing that message and giving the recruiter a reason to accept. And I've had some really funny ones too that I'm like, okay, yeah, they put some effort into it, and it stood out, and yeah.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I gotta say, I mean, as you mentioned, now that you shared this sort of insight as to personalizing your requests and your messages and such, there's gonna be all these people saying, pretty much exactly what you just said now, right? About how they saw you on TechLifeSkills. It's sort of. It's almost the phenomenon of, we fundamentally fit to the mean with a lot of different things, and I'm bringing statistics into this now, but, at the end of the day, I guess what the message is that you could take away from this is not that, you should, people are going to, take exactly what you say verbatim and just copy that into a LinkedIn connection request now, but rather the idea is that up until the point that you said that, people were, the average person was just like, hey, could you please review my profile? And the ones that were sort of standing out from that sort of personalize their requests. Now, if everybody's personalizing their requests, remember that becomes the mean, right? You need the new creativity to make it stand out.
Yeah, that's the status quo then.
Exactly. Right. It's like it's almost like I'm not sure if this is a perfect analogy, but almost like the saying that with machine learning, for example, if you can predict, for example, where the stock market is going, you've made it unpredictable again, right? Because now that prediction is going to change the stock market.
There you go. Exactly.
So this prediction you've given us over here is going to change what people need to do now. So I guess the real takeaway is that you do need that creativity, to make it stand out from everybody else.
I think that's important to call out, Tanmay, because, people will say, I'm following the template. I saw a template for sending LinkedIn requests, and I'm doing exactly that, and I'm still not getting any traction. And it's like, okay, well, that's every single student on LinkedIn is using that same template. It's not going to work. I saw the similar type of thing with resumes. There's a certain university. I'm based here in Ontario. There's a university in Ontario, and there was one particular resume template. Every developer at this university. So I think someone went out there and said, some recruiter somewhere said, oh, I love this template. It's the best template for developers. Give it 6 months. Every single resume I saw from that university, computer science, engineering, was the exact same template. And then I would get one from another school, and I would say, well, this is actually refreshing because I'm not just looking at the same thing. Yeah. So yeah, it's funny how people kind of cling on to that.
That's really interesting to hear. I mean, yeah, everybody following that same template. I mean, developers, they just kind of like to do that anyway. I mean, we've seen like IDE themes, right? Every developer is the same one. Anyway, speaking of LinkedIn and, making your requests stand out, could you maybe actually give us an example of someone that you've actually hired from LinkedIn? Like, has this actually happened before? You've got these thousands of connection requests. When's an example of something that it actually sort of went through and worked out?
Totally. Yeah. So when I'm hiring, really, the first thing I do is I go to my LinkedIn and I think, who in my network would be a great fit for this role? So before I even actually look at the job posting, the resumes that came in on there, you want to see people that you already know, that you trust, that you might have built a relationship with. So right away, I'm already turning to my network. I'm putting out the call on my LinkedIn. Hey, do you have any recommendations for this role? That's typically where recruiters tend to go first. And I think for a lot of developers, it's kind of scary. It's a scary thought, right? Because, they're relying on having a personal brand or a LinkedIn profile and being active on it. And a lot of the times that's not really what you're focused on. And you're like, okay, just let me build my code. I'm not worrying about what, maybe my LinkedIn looks like. So it's a hard thing for people to kind of come around to and start on that. But yeah, in terms of hiring people on LinkedIn, I say all my best hires have came from LinkedIn. So a couple of years ago, I hired a recruiter to join our team,
Mhm.
and she actually messaged me for a coffee chat, but not just to say, hey, can I have a coffee chat? It was more like, hey, I've been working in marketing for several years. I really want to switch to campus recruiting.
Mhm.
I've talked to Brian, who at this company, Joe at another company. I've done my research, and they all told me to come talk to you and to get your opinion on it.
Mhm.
And I'm like, yeah, what's a coffee chat? Going into the call, I said, absolutely not. This person is not, like, based on their profile, their resume, just not, doesn't have the same experience as other candidates.
Mhm.
Had the coffee chat, went super well. I was, pleasantly surprised, and I said, okay, we'll throw that person into the interview pool. So they got into the interview pool with all the other candidates that had, on the book, looked like the more qualified candidate. Turns out that candidate from LinkedIn ended up passing, being the top candidate, and that's who we
Really?
hired.
Wow.
So I think that really speaks to, how much of an impression you can make. You might not be the most qualified person on paper, but really standing out and putting in that time. Like, this person was hustling like for a year. They were, meeting as many people as they could, just soaking the information in, building that network, and it paid
Mhm.
off.
Wow. Yeah. Being able to show that you actually put in the work and, did that
Yeah.
effort and that research really does, really does make things stand out and makes your job, of course, Bridget, a lot easier because, of the thousands of
Yeah.
people that are sort of reaching out to you, when you see someone that's actually putting in that effort, I'm sure that's refreshing. And I'm sure that actually, it makes you more capable of being able to help them. So I understand that's definitely helpful. Now, there are a couple of questions from the live stream that I want to take up really quickly.
Great.
One is
Yeah.
from Nadir on LinkedIn, and I'll get to that in just a
Hmm.
moment. But first, I do want to take up a question from Astronomy with Manas on the YouTube chat. He's asking, and this is a bit of a more open-ended question, especially
Sure.
for a company like IBM, but I do want to take it up. And he's saying, what do you expect from interns or other people that apply to IBM? So, like, for example, which degrees matter? So, any thoughts
Hmm.
on that?
Yeah, I mean, obviously looking at the job postings, and I always say, like, if you're in grade 12, or if you're in first year university and maybe you're not thinking about internships yet, or even grade 9, start researching them now. Like, figure out, see what companies, if you're like, yes, I want to work at Google or Microsoft or IBM, now's the time that you should be, every time there's an intern posting up, copy it down, take a screenshot of that so you have that, and you're really building your skill set aligned to kind of that future career path. So my best advice is, like, the more prepared you can be is really doing your research. It's tough now to get an internship. I will say it's quite competitive. And really putting in the hustle is what pays off. So what I mean by that is, if you're, for example, a developer, I want to see a side project that you're building. Like,
Mhm.
what are you doing on the weekend? Like, how passionate are you that you're actually spending your time working on something?
Mhm.
Those are the types of things that can really make you stand out, especially when you don't have any industry experience yet.
Yeah, I can personally vouch for the fact that a lot of the
Well, yeah.
great developers that I know, and including ones at IBM, are the ones where they'll, like, take vacation time off, and even during that vacation time, they're like, "Oh, I'm coding this other project." And it's like, aren't you supposed to be taking
Right.
vacation? Well, I'm not coding for work. So,
Yeah,
yeah, when you're passionate
that
about something,
passion,
that
right?
yeah,
Yeah,
that
that's
shines through.
huge.
All right. I do also want to take up a question from Adair now. And
Yeah.
his question is it true that sometimes recruiters will contact great people through their LinkedIn profile without them having applied before? Does that happen sometimes?
Oh yeah. Absolutely, Natter. That's a good question, because I think there's a lot of, like, mystery behind LinkedIn recruiting, and I love to share, like, the other side. Like, what does it look like from a recruiter's point of view?
Mm-hmm.
So we have this thing, kind of a special LinkedIn license called LinkedIn Recruiter,
Mm-hmm.
where, companies purchase this so that their recruiters can reach out to, basically unlimited number of candidates. So yes, that's called sourcing, and sourcing happens for every single job role pretty much. So half the time, the candidate for the role might even be found already before we get to maybe the resumes that, came in on the initial job posting.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why I cannot stress enough, your LinkedIn really needs to be strong. If you want to stand out, you really need to have a strong LinkedIn because it's an algorithm, right? So we're searching LinkedIn based on keywords. It's quite simple. And I always say, like, I think kind of a trend lately has been putting like kind of very creative titles in LinkedIn, like Ninja Master, whatever, right? To stand out. Seen some pretty cool titles, but unfortunately, those are not the things that are going to come up in the algorithm when we're searching. So little things like that, just seeing the other side as a recruiter, it's very important to keep your profile up to date and with the accurate skills.
Yeah, I mean, social media in general fundamentally is run by the algorithms that are in the back end, right?
Oh, true.
I mean YouTube, for
Yeah.
example, right? Like this live
Yeah.
stream, if I don't have the right keywords in the title, and if people aren't, subscribed with notifications on, and if so on and so forth, there's so many different factors that go into YouTube deciding, hey, should I recommend this to someone or not? Same thing with LinkedIn. Should I recommend this live stream to someone or not? Right? And if they're not
Yeah.
being recommended to the right people, they're not going to be seen by the right people. And similarly, if your LinkedIn profile isn't catered to fitting to the algorithm that recruiters are using to find you, they're not going to be able
Yeah.
to find you. So, making sure that
Absolutely.
not only is it a high quality profile, but something that's actually accessible by computers. Because, as a human, while creative titles might be great, like, for example, recently we had Melissa Sassy on the show, and I recently did an event with her called The Human Code, and she has, super creative title, Chief Penguin at IBM,
Yeah.
for IBMC.
Melissa's awesome.
Yeah. And, it's a wonderful title. And as humans, we love it, but the LinkedIn algorithm is like, what's Chief Penguin, right?
Who's searching for that Chief Penguin? Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that's
Yeah.
definitely something to keep in mind. Speaking of which, actually, there are now two more questions that I want to take up. I'm going to sort of merge them from the YouTube chat. One is from Shyam on the YouTube live stream saying, what qualities are required to get an internship? As well as a question from Vidhi saying, is the degree important, or are projects also considered for internships? So what qualities are important, and is the degree important, or, are side projects also considered?
Yeah. So starting kind of with the qualities, I would say really we touched on this, but that passion and that curiosity and a growth mindset, like that's what I look point blank for in every candidate, is that if you don't have that, if you're not the person that's going to question, why are we doing it this way? Have we thought about, doing that differently? Then you're probably not going to fit in our organization, because that's kind of at the heart of innovation is, ripping things apart and saying, like, why are we doing it this way? So I think that's huge. So when you think of qualities, it's really to have that mindset. There's obviously like your soft skills, your communication skills, and, on paper, having all of, the technical skills, the coding languages to kind of check the boxes. But, to take you to the next level is really to have those, that growth mindset. And then, this is switching to kind of like the degree piece. I would say, it's important to have both, right? So, education can get you only so far. It can get your foot in the door. And that's, most companies do require a degree. That's changing. I know IBM, for one, is really launched what we call New Collar, and has really disrupted the industry with programs like PTAC, Pathways Learning. So kind of changing that traditional education model. But a lot of companies, for their traditional tech internships, the degree, I would say, matters to an extent. Yes, you have one, and it's, generally in the right domain, computer science, engineering. Does it matter that your major is slightly different from the job? No. And, projects too, like projects are great, but if you don't have any industry experience, then it's a bit of a challenge. So I think it's important to balance both and to have both the projects and the industry experience. I mean, Even I remember speaking to a PhD student not too long ago. He's literally been a student his entire life, right? He hasn't done a single internship or job outside of, maybe the lab. And now he's like, academia is not for me. I want to go into industry. And he's applied to hundreds of roles and he hasn't gotten anywhere.
Mm-hmm.
And unfortunately, it really comes down to having that industry experience. So I think, education or degrees on paper can only take you so far.
Mm-hmm.
I think you need to be continually learning. I think that's part of it, but just relying on the degree itself is not enough.
Yeah, I mean, going back to, unfortunately, I'm forgetting exactly which episode of Tech Life Skills this was from, but one of the key words from it, I'll try and find that,
Mm-hmm.
was be a learn-it-all, not a know-it-all, right? And
Yes.
it sort of ties right back into here, having that mindset, and also at the same time, I've personally seen, I've had a couple of years of like industry experience actually working with
Yeah.
technology, and the kind of insight that you can garner into the way that things work, and being able to apply that to new projects is really unique with industry experience, and I don't think you get
Yeah.
that from just a standardized sort of formal education. That's something that you need a lot of
Yeah.
just experience bouncing off of lots of different projects to be able to get, which is again why being able to say that as a developer you have these other side projects is nice, because you have
Yeah.
experience, and so that sort of adds
Exactly.
up.
Yeah.
So I mean, you can imagine. I forgot exactly what project this was again, but there was someone who built this really famous JavaScript library that basically everybody uses, right? I don't know of a
Yeah.
developer that doesn't use this library, and he was rejected from getting to an interview at a certain job role because he didn't have a certain number of years of experience with the library that he created.
Oh.
So,
Wow.
so there was a bit of a
Okay.
discrepancy there. So that's yeah. So having experience is definitely important. So there are lots of different questions coming in. I do want to get to all of them.
Good.
Next. From Ashutosh on the live stream, you say you need to have a strong LinkedIn, but could you please elaborate on what that actually means?
Yeah, great question. And when I say a strong LinkedIn, I'm not only talking about your profile, but your
Mm-hmm.
presence on
Mm-hmm.
LinkedIn. So that's half of it. Setting up your profile. I mean, LinkedIn, the algorithm tells you, okay, I'm 100%, I'm a LinkedIn all-star with my profile. That's obviously kind of like the base. But a lot of people, have a great profile. They have the picture, they have everything filled in, an awesome summary, and then see you later. They're not on LinkedIn, right? So part of LinkedIn is, like we were talking about with any social media, it's how frequently you use it, you interact, and that's going to impact how you're coming up in recruiter search results. So I say start small. If you're not comfortable, hosting a video series or, writing an article, start small. Share an interesting article you read in, a journal or the news this week and add your commentary on it. Engage, comment on other people's posts. And the more active you are, the better really for your performance on LinkedIn. So carve out, 5-10 minutes of every day to stay active on LinkedIn. I think this really speaks to networking, Tanmay, because a
Mm-hmm.
lot of students, the first time they're ever messaging a recruiter is when they need something. And when you think about it with human relations, does that work? Like, do people respect that? No, of course not. You don't want to hear from someone whenever they need something for you, right? So the same goes to careers and job finding. Start to build that relationship with these people on LinkedIn. And once, you've kind of had a solid foundation, you've been, interacting on there for several months, maybe that's when they're more likely to do you a favor. But these like cold requests, I think, are what really turns a lot of recruiters off and kind of gives people a bad name.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it almost sort of important to take a look at it from the other end. If someone had sort of reached out to
Totally.
you just to ask for a single favor and to never talk to you again,
Hmm.
you probably wouldn't want to talk to them or respond to them. So, that's definitely important to keep in mind. And
Yeah.
also, there is another really interesting question, actually, from the LinkedIn chat saying, and this is from Tekevwe, saying, do recruiters ever rate unfinished projects, or should you only list finished projects? And one thing that I will say here
Yeah.
really quickly from a developer standpoint
Yeah.
is that, of course, everything's, case to case dependent. But I think that, the work that you've done, even on something that is unfinished, is still really impressive sometimes, right? Like there's
Yeah.
projects that have been in development for literally years on open source. Things
Hmm.
like GNU Herd, like the kernel, React OS, the open source Windows clone,
Yeah.
Darling, the sort of emulation layer for Darwin. Just because they're unfinished doesn't mean they're not impressive. I would say the developers behind those teams are more talented than any of the developers I've ever met, right? So,
Yeah.
but what do you think from a
Yeah.
recruiter's perspective?
No, absolutely. I'm glad you said that, Tanmay, because we feel the exact same way. So it actually frustrates me so much when I'm talking to someone, on a coffee chat or in an interview, and they tell me, oh, yeah, and I'm also doing this thing on the side, and I've built this really cool project. I'm like, what? What? Where is it? I don't see it. It's not on your resume. It's not on your LinkedIn. You're lucky you just happen to bring it up right now, because otherwise I would have never known. And they're like, well, I'm not really sure. I just started. Or
Mhm.
the same goes for new jobs. Oh, I haven't been there long. I'm a little nervous to kind of put it on there. Don't be like, that's learning in itself. And like you said, like those unfinished projects, the skills that you're learning from that are huge. And like the same goes for hackathons too. It's like,
Yeah.
tell me you competed in this hackathon or you were part of this contest. They're like, well, I didn't win. I wasn't in the top three. I'm like, who cares? The part of it is really building that skill set and learning something new. And that shows me your growth mindset, your willingness
Mhm.
to learn.
Yeah, actually, I do want to dig a little bit deeper into that sort of hackathon thing that we talked about there, and
Yeah.
I'll get to that because there are a couple questions. But first, though, I do want to ask a question from Alicia on the YouTube live stream asking for you, Bridget, what was the key to turning your own internship into a career?
Yeah, that's an awesome question, Alicia. Thank you for that. So I actually I went to the University of Waterloo. For those that are in Ontario, will be familiar with that school. So I had 5 different co-ops during my time there, which was neat. And I highly recommend, like, don't do your co-op or internship at the same company for some people that works for them. For me, I really wanted to try out new experiences, new companies,
Hmm.
and different jobs. And for me, that's the perk of an internship. So I did an internship at IBM and then, a couple other companies. And, upon graduation, IBM happened to have a campus recruiter opening. And of course, that was my foot in the door, having that internship already. I actually wasn't even interning in that department at all. I was interning in product marketing for analytics division. So completely different from campus recruiting. But they saw, hey, I interned there. Okay, let's give her an interview. And as a new grad, I was not necessarily the most qualified on paper. In fact, they hired me before I even graduated. And they were like, okay, we'll wait for you to graduate. I said, I only have a couple more months, and they're okay with that. So yeah, really getting that internship experience for me was the launching pad to kicking off my career.
That's very nice. It's these sorts of experiences that I'm sure people will love to sort of learn from and sort of derive some insight from because it's just so, it's great to be able to hear your story. Now, there is another question from
Yeah.
Shiva asking, companies prefer experienced candidates, and experience comes from working. And so, doing projects and as a freelancer, how can I show my work and area of expertise?
Yeah. So, I mean, to me, it doesn't matter if you're freelancing or working in industry. I think it's still very valid experience. So, really building a portfolio, I think that's huge, whether it's GitHub or, some way to really show off what your work. And, besides just like your resume or your LinkedIn, having your own website, I find is very helpful. A lot of managers prefer to just look on there and see actual projects in action. So, I think the key to getting an internship is all of those things, like the project work and, the freelancing. That's typically how you get that first internship under your belt.
It's very nice. All right, so pretty similar question. There is one from Dem Aurora asking, should your strategy be for an early career looking for internships or rather applying for full-time roles?
Yeah, so most companies are still quite traditional. So if you're still a student, you can only apply for internships, and you're
Mhm.
not eligible, perhaps, for new grad roles. And if you've graduated, then you're not eligible for internships any longer because those are kind of reserved for students. So my advice really is to get while you're in school, to get as much internship experience under your belt. I had 2 years of internship experience by the time I graduated
Mhm.
because of the co-op system, but every summer counts, right? So don't waste an opportunity. And what I mean by that, it doesn't mean you have to work at the big tech companies. Like, that's not what I'm saying at all, but just get any industry experience. So it might be at your dad's office company, and you're
Mhm.
helping, change their servers, or code something for them, right? Like, anything counts. So just kind of getting that initial experience under your belt is huge. Don't wait until fourth year to start looking for that first job.
All right, but actually, follow-up question from another person, Karan Shah,
Yeah.
asking, what about the fresh graduates that don't have that industry experience? Not every
Yeah.
entry-level applicant would have that experience. So, what's your advice for him?
Yeah. Yeah, it's tough. I mean, I've seen it. It's not to say that we wouldn't hire someone without it, but that's when you're gonna have to really show those projects, anything you're doing on the side. It could even be volunteer work. Like, all of that can really help. And I think if you don't have any of that internship experience, that's when you're gonna have to network even harder, right? You're gonna
Hmm.
have to put in the effort to build those connections in the industry.
Hmm. I mean, it's gonna require a lot of networking,
It's
as you
tough.
mentioned. And actually,
Yeah.
another follow-up question from Karan
Okay.
on networking is, how do you actually keep in touch with someone on LinkedIn? It's a professional platform. What's a good sort of topic or something to build a LinkedIn relationship upon?
Yeah, I like this question because I think it's something that a lot of people struggle with. And it can be quite simple. So it's, if that person posts, an article, just commenting on that, like, the more you're engaging with them. Um, I like to tell this story because I met a student at one of the universities in Ottawa. He was first year, so freshman year of college at the school, and he came out to our IBM info session, and I must have talked to him like literally for 30 seconds, but he won the door prize. And that's it. Like, I just remember he won the door prize. And then, I went back, I'm flying over across the country to all these schools, and he said, like, "Hey, it's Connor. I was the door prize guy. I love to stay in touch with you." And I'm like, "Yeah, that stood out to me, right?" Connor kept in touch with me every single semester of his entire degree. That's 4 years. He
Wow.
would check in with me every single time. If I wasn't on campus myself personally, but my colleagues were there, Connor came to every single IBM info session. And he wasn't even looking for a job at the time, but he really, really understood, like, this concept of networking. And, sometimes he would just stop in and be like, "Hey, it's me, the door prize guy. I got to go to class, but I just wanted to say hi and welcome back to Ottawa." And for me, that really stuck out to me because I'm like, wow, this guy really cares. Like, he's really
Yeah.
believes in the genuine connections, like,
Hmm.
and that's lacking. Like, that authenticity is really lacking.
Hmm.
So the reason I tell this story, Tanmay, is that, so Connor eventually graduates. He doesn't even end up working at IBM. He starts working at another tech company, but
Hmm.
he's still, still engaging and whatever. And then he messages me and he goes, "Hey, actually, like, my good friend and classmate applied to an IBM internship."
Hmm.
And because, like, I have this relationship, we've built this connection over LinkedIn. I said, "Yeah, give me his name. Let's see. Let's put him in the thing." We ended up hiring this candidate, his friend, and
Wow.
he wasn't even looking for a favor for himself, but if anyone off the street asked me that, the answer would be different. So I think it's important to really stay authentic in
Yeah.
networking, and not as I mentioned, just when you need something.
Yeah, I mean, building actual genuine human connection is important because recruiters are people.
Yeah,
So
exactly. We're not we're not bots as much as you think.
unfortunately, Watson doesn't do the recruiting yet. So that's for version 2. No, but really though, yeah, having that human connection is important. Even if it wasn't a favor for him, the fact that you have that connection and you have that certain level of trust sort of then translates to
Yeah.
wanting to sort of help him out, and sort of enables you to do so. So absolutely, having that sort of personal connection is important. So hopefully that answered your question, Karan. Okay, so another question from Daman Aurora asks, if you have experience in a certain role in the technology space, so for example, let's just say support, and now you
Mhm.
want to pivot into a more challenging role, such as being an actual developer, how would one actually go about doing so?
Yeah, this is a really common problem I see, and especially with developers looking to pivot into product management,
Hmm.
which is extremely competitive field. I see that's kind of a common question too. But yeah, if you're working in a certain, like support right now,
Hmm.
um, find out those organizations and those teams that you want to join. And if there's a hot area that they're working on, figure out what that is and start to build relationships and network with that team. Put your hand up, say, hey, I'd be happy to help on any side project you guys have, any stretch work assignment. These are going to be things you obviously got to get your day job done, and you're going to be putting in the extra hours helping out with something else. But that's how you really get your foot in the door, is kind of those stretch assignments. um,
Hmm.
but yeah, I've seen it's difficult because I think a lot of students kind of pigeonhole themselves into one area of software development really early. And then they might realize, oh, I didn't actually want to do front end. And now I'm in my 4th year and all I've done is front end internships and I want to do machine learning, right? So think about that when you're getting experience, not to kind of narrow your outcomes.
Yeah, I gotta say, I mean, maybe it's not like a perfect analogy, but I
Yeah.
feel like with technology, you have the opportunity to be so much more flexible than any other field allows you to be.
Yeah.
Like if you do like glass blowing, for example, it's a lot more difficult for you to get into like, blacksmithing and dealing with metal than it would
Sure.
be for you to do front end if you're a back end developer, right? And the reason for
Yeah.
that is quite
Yeah.
simply just accessibility and area of expertise, right? If you're really good at
Yeah.
working with glass, maybe that would help you in terms of experience with working these materials in terms of metal, but doesn't mean that would immediately translate to being a really good, guy. That I'm forgetting the exact word for it, but
Hmm.
the sort of same analogy to the world of metal, and within software, you have that opportunity to be so much more flexible because as a developer, if I want to get into system administration and if I want to, figure out how to use Docker and all these different tools and the back
Yeah.
end behind my operating system and cybersecurity, it's relatively a lot easier for me to do so. So, yeah, I mean, you're completely right. As a developer, don't pigeonhole
Yeah.
yourself into that one little constrained area. Even when it comes to programming languages, right? I've seen so many people say that,
Yes.
I want to be a great Java developer, but that's not how things work in industry, right? You're going to be put on a
No.
brand new team with a brand new programming language that you've never heard before, and you need to be able to adapt quickly to
Go
those new
figure it out.
languages.
Yeah.
Exactly, right? Like,
Yeah.
programming languages aren't like natural languages, right? In the real world, you're not just going to be thrown in
Yeah.
a different country and expect to, speak their language. But in the programming world, every programming language basically follows the same general concepts. So, you can be shuffled
Right.
around.
You can.
You need people to adapt.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's definitely important. And
Totally.
also a question about this that I can finally answer myself as well from Vidhi that came in through the live stream. Are front end developers also hired at IBM? I can say for a fact that I know that they are. So
Yes, I can. I think I know a few, more than a few. Yeah, no,
wonderful.
absolutely. I think that's cool about technology and most tech companies is that there's like everything under the sun, right? Like
Hmm.
half of the companies are, working with so many different languages. And, within one company, we have everything from mainframe developers to, some of the hottest Watson technology, and you can pivot and you can shift. So
Yeah.
that's really important.
Yeah, I gotta say, it's so fascinating to see the variety of developers that you meet at a company like IBM. Like you'll go to one division, there'll be
Yeah.
someone working on like the Linux kernel on Z, there'll be someone working on like,
Yep.
machine learning algorithms for the new Watson Studio Local, there'll be, somebody working on compilers, LLVM running on Power, the new XL Clang and all these things. It's like it goes from the lowest levels to the highest
Crazy.
levels. Yeah, it really is.
Yeah.
Um, and so that's definitely something to keep in mind. Okay, so there also is a question from Shum on the live stream again. He's asking, what book would you like to suggest, or if you do have any suggestions, on hiring for an entrepreneur? So if they want to learn more about the world of recruitment themselves, do you have any suggestions?
Yeah, I mean, I'll tell you what I'm reading right now. It's not necessarily really, it is in a way. So, Dare to Lead by Brene Brown. And I think that book, we talked about this before, Tanmay, but like soft skills, and
Yeah.
just I think it's so important for everyone to kind of read this concept of radical candor and feedback, and it will really benefit you in any capacity or job that you're trying to enter into, because you know it's so important to kind of lead with that and have those soft skills.
Yeah, soft skills are the kinds of things that I feel like developers in general are stereotypically not that great at. But communication and really other soft skills, but particularly one that I want to focus on being communication, I think is really important, because if you build, the world's next greatest compiler infrastructure or the next greatest, microkernel architecture or whatever, if you can't tell people why it's so great, if you can't, connect
Yes.
with people and make them relate to that and the problem that it solves, then unfortunately your software is not going to be really used anywhere, or your technology in
Yeah.
general, right? So
Yeah, I
break
think
that
that
stereotype.
no, that's huge. And I think obviously we're virtually recruiting right now, but we used to when we were in person have these events called the IBM Finish Line, and that was our big hiring events where we brought in everyone in the final stage of the developer hiring process to come in person. And I remember one student in particular, and leading up until the event, they go through 3-4 rounds of technical interviews, coding assessments, everything under the sun. This guy, like, we've never seen anything like it. He was the highest candidate. Managers were like, wow, this is insane. So, we brought him in, and the Finish Line event, really, it's a couple-day event, but it's really a hackathon. So you get paired in a team of 5 other candidates that are looking to also get a job. And this particular student, he struggled in the team environment.
No.
He was not open to hearing others' ideas. He got frustrated. He kind of lashed out. He had to step away. And, going into that event, we would have said, without a doubt, offer like top candidate for sure. Ended up, we didn't hire that individual. And he is probably one of the most talented developers in the US that we met out of that school. But the soft skills weren't there. The teaming, the communication, and it's a tough, it's kind of tough love, right? Like to figure that out and to go through that. But I like to tell that story because I think it just speaks to how important those soft skills are.
Yeah, and I mean, I also got to say, just to think that, like, to take an IBM example, right? DB2, the DB2 code base, something that's been in use for literally decades now. Like you'll open up a source code file and you'll see last modified 1982 or whatever, right? So it's pretty old.
The OG,
yeah. It's got like tens of millions of lines of code to it. If I recall correctly, somewhere near 30 to 40 million lines of code. No single developer is ever going to write that much code. So actually writing code is only half of the challenge when you're coding something that enterprise grade and large, which is what you're going to be doing at tech companies, right? The other half of the challenge is just working with the people to get things done, right? Like I've worked quite literally
Well,
on projects. Yeah,
yeah.
exactly. Like with DB2, for example. And half of the challenge is just finding, who within the organization would actually know how to get this to compile with some certain version of a compiler on an operating system, right? So,
Yeah.
it's definitely a big challenge, but it's worth it. So having those soft skills, I think, I mean, as you mentioned, is more than just half of the challenge, actually.
Yeah.
So now there's another question from Abhishek, which I think is really interesting, asking how much does a middle career break of, say, a year affect the interview and overall sort of career outcome, and why is this mostly taken as a negative thing?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, honestly, it shouldn't be taken as a negative thing. And I think kind of the aperture, the outlook on that is changing. Like people are more open to that now, but I
Mm-hmm.
do not see that as a negative thing at all. In fact, most tech companies now have tech reentry programs for people that took a break, whether it may be to raise their family or dealing with difficult circumstances. So there's actually these reentry programs that exist for that very purpose. So the best advice I can give for people that have had to take a break or chose, on their own, some people just take a sabbatical, and that's okay because burnout is real in the tech industry. So the biggest advice really is just be transparent about it. Actually put on your resume, was off on a sabbatical or leave from this date to this date.
Mm-hmm.
And that's like that answers kind of like, oh, what's the gap like in their, work history? Why is there that weird gap?
Mm-hmm.
Just be upfront about it. You'll find more times than not, people are just understanding. And at the end of the day, everyone's human
Mm-hmm.
and have gone through that.
Yeah, I mean, I do agree. Being upfront about things usually is the best thing to do in any scenario, especially in this one.
Yeah.
And so being
Yeah.
able to be honest about exactly what it is that caused you to take that break is fundamentally the best thing to do in that scenario. So there is another question from Labib. Hi, Labib. He says, hello, Tim and Bridget. Hope all is well. A lot of students say that getting internships is more based on luck and prefer applying in huge quantity rather than tailoring their resume for each job. What are your thoughts? And there's another question, but I will get to that. So, what are your
Yeah.
thoughts on that, on that approach?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I'll say I don't believe in luck. So
Yeah.
I think it all comes down to hard work and give yourself more credit than that, right? So um, what you shouldn't just fire off, 10,000 applications and not really care or have a direction of where you want to go. But then on the other end, you shouldn't spend so much time customizing something that you're not even exploring other options. I've
Mm-hmm.
seen people that have been working on their one application to a company and they message me, they're like, oh, I'm getting ready, I've been working on it for 2 weeks, I'm about to submit it, and I'm like, well, sorry, the job is already filled. Like, it's quick, it's just in time. So and it's sad to tell people that because they've been working on it for so long and put so much effort into it. So I think there is a balance. Like, you don't want to be too far on one end of things that you're just kind of firing off everywhere. But like all the things we talked about earlier, just kind of setting yourself up, building, showcasing those side projects, whatever you're doing outside of your schoolwork.
Yeah, I mean, I gotta say, as you talk about this, my mind can't help but think about the interesting statistics that actually go behind this. Like, what's the exact sort of trade-off between the amount of time that you spend tailoring, a specific application versus the number that you're able to do. That would be an
Yep.
interesting area to look into.
Good.
All right, but another question from Labid. Asking if I wanted to approach a recruiter on LinkedIn whom I didn't meet at any job fair, how would I
Sure.
approach them and actually build great relationships?
Yeah. So be very specific with why if you're going to reach out to a recruiter, the worst thing you can do is to message them. I think I mentioned this at the start and say,
Mm-hmm.
like, hello, ma'am, please review my profile and let me know if I'm a fit for any openings at IBM. Like,
Mm-hmm.
first of all, you're putting the work back on the recruiter when there's I mentioned thousands of people messaging them. So why would they spend the time reviewing your profile when you haven't even done the work to see if you're a fit for that company? So that's a big no. The other is just, messaging them for the first time and saying, hi, I have some questions about the process. Can you get on a call with me? Mm-hmm. That one is also really not great because you haven't even like built any type of relationship with them, or why would they spend 30 minutes of their day to answer questions that you can probably just Google on the internet or on their website, right? Mm-hmm. So really be careful about what you're asking a recruiter. And part of, as I mentioned, the networking piece is not even maybe messaging them at first, but just engaging with their content and their posts on LinkedIn. And then they'll be like, oh, I know there's people right now. I know on my LinkedIn, I'm like, oh, that's that guy. That's that girl. I'm gonna, the next time they message me, I'm like, oh yeah, I remember her because she's always commenting, right? So I think it's just like we talked about, it's a marathon, not a sprint. It's a long-term game, and you have to start early.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, starting early is definitely an advantage in a lot of scenarios, and it goes back to our exact point of being a marathon, not a sprint. What exactly is that trade-off, right? So you don't want to sit there for days overthinking exactly it is what you're saying, right?
What to say, yeah.
But at the same time, you also don't just want to fire off a generic message to thousands of people, right? Because there's no value in that. Exactly. So building those relationships is important, and doing so the right way as well. Mm-hmm. Now there's another question. This one's a bit more personalized. And this one's from Vidya. I'm kind of modifying a little bit. She asked if we're from India and we're students, are we allowed to take up your internships? But I think a better question to answer is, what are the opportunities for students in India to get internships at IBM?
Yeah, absolutely. We have a ton of hiring in India right now, especially. It's pretty on par to the number of opportunities we have in the US and Canada. So very great internship programs in India. One of them, Extreme Blue, I recommend you checking out. It's a great program. But yeah, no, as long as you are eligible to work in that country, then you are definitely eligible for an internship.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So hopefully that answered your question, Vidya. If you do have more specific questions, feel free to put them in the YouTube live stream chat. All right. So there is another question from Jeevan, and let's see if I've learned anything today from you, Bridget. So Jeevan's asking, is it wise to put prior startup experience in your resume? And my answer would be, put all of that experience on your resume. Am I right?
Yes, you got it. You nailed it, Tanmay. Yeah, like startup experience is great. Like we look for startup experience because for me, like working at a startup, that you have a certain mindset and you've gone through something really difficult and you've had to be a jack of all trades, so to speak. So, you can't buy that you can't pluck that experience out of a university, right? That's very unique. And we, like, especially at a big tech company like IBM, we're looking within our teams to bring that entrepreneurial mindset and that startup environment and scale it down to the team level. So yeah, that's cool. Great question.
Thank you. Yeah, so thank you for answering that. And Jeevan, hopefully that answered your question. Definitely do put that on your resume. All right, so now another question from Shiva asking, do personality and rewards matter other than resume? Other than just your resume. So sort of goes back to the same old question of, the sort of mindset that you should have and how much that factors into the hiring decision. If there's any more insight that you want to share, I'd love to hear it.
Yeah, I mean, some companies actually have personality tests that are kind of an assessment, which is kind of common. We don't do that at IBM, but because I feel like, we don't want to have one type of individual, right, at a company. That really, we want diversity of thought. So I think with personality tests, it's a little, there's a whole debate on that, because if you're trying to target one certain personality at your company, is there really diversity of thought in your company? So I won't go down that path, but express yourself. And I think don't be afraid, especially on things like LinkedIn, to let a little bit of your personality shine through, right?
Hmm.
And show your interest. And, we're all humans and no one just wants to see business content all day long as much
Hmm.
as, people have side interests and hobbies and passions, and kind of let that come through. And you never know, that might be the connection point with an interviewer. That's quite common, right?
Absolutely. I my passion happens to be, technology, of course. But I'll post on all kinds of platforms different things that are just fun about technology. Like a little while ago, one of my friends he was testing out like video compression, and he because he wants to upload videos to YouTube, and he sent me two video clips, and he was like,
Yeah.
"Which one looks worse? Can you tell which one's compressed?" And I couldn't really tell, but I wanted to get the right answer, so I fed both of the clips into a little Python script that would count the number of unique colors in both both the videos, and it would tell me which one's compressed. And his response
Only
to
you,
that.
Tanmay.
But then he responded to that, and he was like, "Can you not code for 5 minutes?"
So
So
true.
these sorts of things, they
Yeah,
do
just
have their place, right? On even platforms like LinkedIn.
exactly. And that just makes you more relatable, right? And
Hmm.
more human. And I think that's really at the heart of everything.
Yeah, exactly. You don't want to give off that, purely exclusive brand image necessarily. You
Yes.
want to be a person, you want to be human. So,
Yeah.
if that's definitely important. We've seen how that worked out for Wendy's. So, um,
Yeah.
yeah. All right. So now another question. I'll start off by taking one that's a bit more technical, since that's just a quick
Mhm.
redirect. A question from MD Mrinmoy on the live stream chat asks, I want to learn software engineering and AI. Can you help me? I would recommend, in terms of resources, there is an online platform called cognitiveclass.ai, as well
Mhm.
as, of course, my YouTube channel that you can take a look at, as well as the 3 books that I've written on technology. So feel free to take a look at those. I do already have links to those in the description, and I will be sure to add one to Cognitive Class. As a matter of fact, I can just put that in the live stream chat right now. So hopefully that helps out. All right, so now another question. Speaking of business content, Bridget, this
Yeah.
question's from Eddie Goes To on YouTube, asking, I want to transition my career, but all of my experience is in business. Any
Mm.
tips on how to make my projects and coding knowledge stand out from my past business experience on my LinkedIn profile?
Yeah. I mean, I'm seeing this more and more, right? As the economy is changing and,
Hmm.
the new way of working and jobs, a lot of people with, business or an arts degree even are reskilling themselves and joining coding boot camps, and really, it's never too late to learn, right? So,
Hmm.
yeah, I mean, I wouldn't downplay your business experience on your LinkedIn, because that's also extremely valuable, and it actually complements the new tech skills that you're learning. But try to, I'll say, bring to the top or highlight even more those new coding skills you've been learning.
Hmm. So, getting to highlight that those new projects you've been working on, the experience that you have, I
Yeah.
think is, and as a matter of fact, I would say that within technology, having past experience doing something else is actually a big plus in a lot of cases, right? Like having worked in art, for
Yeah.
example, right? That not only is that a creative field and sort of shows sort of creativity that you have, and sort of how
Yeah.
that pretty easily translates to technology, right? Because I would personally say, as a technologist, that complex computing systems are art. And so
Yeah.
that's definitely one part. But even, like, for example, business experience, if you're working at an enterprise like IBM, being able to say,
Hmm.
this is, building this technology, understanding how that ties into the business as well, is also a huge part of it. Like, I've seen too many projects where developers are going to be on the project building something, they'll spend months on it, they'll go to a client and they'll be like, this isn't what we asked for, this isn't what we need, right? This isn't tailored
Right.
for us. So I think that's actually a big plus in a lot of cases, is having past
Yeah.
experience somewhere. So
Agree.
that could be helpful. Now, a question that I have is, we're in a pretty different scenario than usual right now with the whole pandemic
Yeah.
situation, which is unfortunate. Lots of things have had to shift to be virtual, including TechLifeSkills. I mean, you're in Canada. Would have been
There
great
you
to
go.
actually have you at the lab and do this in person,
Yeah.
but Next time, for sure, when
Yeah.
we transition back to doing this in person. But I do want to know, what are your predictions sort of out into the future when things are sort of, settling down from the pandemic? What are your predictions for, like, virtual recruiting and different events? What do you think is going to happen?
Yeah. I've been thinking about this a lot lately, and I think we're gonna see a lot of things stay virtual. And I know this doesn't feel great for everyone, but I think companies are realizing the efficiencies of being virtual. Here's a classic example: take campus recruiting. You might have 30 recruiters flying across the country doing multiple events at schools, and having a fully virtual season under our belt now and seeing how effective it's been. It's a question of, is there still value in doing that in person? And I think it's going to be a hybrid approach. So I can see a lot of conferences staying virtual and not going back to in person. But I still do believe in the genuine connection points that are made at these types of events and in person. And it's very hard to replicate that virtually. I've seen many platforms and companies and conferences try, but I haven't seen a great solution yet.
Hmm.
So I think it'll be interesting to see as we kind of go to this new normal, what stays and what does become, the new normal.
Hmm. And I gotta say, we were sort of thrust into this pandemic situation out of nowhere, and we've had to transition everything to virtual so quickly that a lot of the solutions that we have are just sort of duct taped on, right? Like, I mean,
Yes,
at first, when teaching transitioned to be virtual,
100%.
right, how teachers would basically do the exact same thing that they would do in person, but just on Zoom. It doesn't really work
Yeah,
that way, right? Like, I've seen,
exactly.
like, through a couple of my friends that there are certain lectures that they'll attend now where the professors have like the whole light board set up and it's black behind
Mhm.
them and that whole sort of glass that they can draw on. It's so much more immersive. It's so much better to be able to do that
Right.
virtually, right? Instead of just sitting there and you have a slide
Watching.
deck with a bunch of text on a PowerPoint, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so the just now that we have this new need, there's slowly going to be a lot of innovation in order to sort of meet that new demand of really nice, easy to use, intuitive tools for a pandemic era world. So I'm
Hmm.
sure much more innovation is coming soon, and hopefully
Yeah.
it
Sooner the
hopefully it
better.
comes soon. And so yeah, that's that's something that we can hope for. Now there are two more questions, or actually a couple more questions that I want to ask. I want to start off with a question from Satwant Palekar. So hi Satwant. She's asking, how would you select a candidate on a hiring index? The professional qualifications or the desired skills coupled with knowledge minus the qualifications?
Wow. That's an interesting question.
Yeah.
I don't think there's one correct answer, right? So it is really based on the candidate.
Mhm.
And that's why I feel like I'm just preaching this soft skills piece. But, again, if you are the most qualified and you have the highest skill set and it comes down to two identical candidates with the exact same background, it's probably going to come down to how you interviewed and who the interviewer kind of made that natural connection with and who they see as a better fit for that organization and that team.
Mhm.
So I would say don't get so caught. I think a lot of people get really stressed out about having the perfect qualifications for a job, and that leads them to not applying for opportunities they may be qualified for. And the research does show that this is very common in women, and that they won't actually apply for jobs unless they meet 9 out of the 10 requirements. And
Mhm.
if you take a male candidate, he'll see 2 of the requirements and apply. And there's a ton of research done to show that difference. So I always say, if you feel like you have, the base of it, and if it, we shoot for the stars for the requirements, right? So companies put like 10 years. I think I've seen some funny memes on Twitter because, some late like coding languages haven't even been around for
Exactly. Yeah, I've
10
seen like
years, right?
Swift ones back in like actually now Swift is like what at this point say 6 years old. I've seen some shop postings like 7, 8 years of Swift experience. Like
You're like,
no.
hey. Yeah. So, I mean, honestly, if you have a a bit of experience in it, don't hesitate to apply, because that, you can learn on the job, and a lot of jobs they're going to throw you in anyway and say, here's a new language, figure it out. So don't get so hung up on the qualifications, I would say.
Absolutely. As a matter of fact, speaking of qualifications, another question from Himalaya on the LinkedIn stream asks, do recruiters consider Mooc, for example, Coursera courses, to be valuable?
Definitely. Yeah. No, I always recommend Cognitive Class that you mentioned earlier, Tanmay, is a really great platform. I've been on there myself, actually. Nice. And then, Coursera, there's so much online courses and learning. It's always great. Like companies like IBM have free badging, right? Like you can get IBM certifications and badges for free. And having that on your resume is really important, because it's like, wow, they've already done some of the requirements that they would do when they were already starting. So those are always good ones to kind of seek out as well.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, now another question from Natter asking, what are the things when you see you consider them as red flags in resumes, and what are some good indicators?
Oh yes, red flags, red flags. Yeah, I've seen some pretty terrible resumes in my day, Tanmay, but the most obvious are ones, spelling, grammatical formatting. That's kind of the more obvious, but some other red flags are candidates that indicate that they're proficient in a certain language, and then you get to an interview and they've taken one basic course on it and have never actually coded in it. Or, they say they're highly advanced in Swift or whatever it may be. And then you start asking them, show me in the interview. And they're like, well, I just took a class in first year university. That was it. So that actually happens more commonly than you would think. A ton of candidates will kind of, I'll say, overestimate their abilities in a certain language. So I always say, if you're going to put it on there, you need to have actually worked in that language. And if you haven't, just say, beginner or, basic X, right? But kind of over qualifying yourself in that is a dangerous slope. And I've seen a lot of candidates be, kind of kicked off consideration for future jobs because, clearly they're not very truthful, and that's not a quality we'd be looking for. Great resumes, in my opinion, are one page. If you can't get it on one page, we have a problem. And really highlighting your accomplishments. And a lot of resumes read like job descriptions, and that is not what you want. So what you want is you want to quantify your experience. And what I mean by that is like, what did you do and what did it change? So the impact of whatever project or whatever code, it might have, decreased runtime by X percentage, resulting in X million dollars saved for the organization. Like really be specific about those outcomes instead of just describing, I logged on, did some code and it went somewhere and then that was it. So I think that's really what makes a good resume from a bad one.
Right, being able to quantify what it is that you did so you can actually see the value in that project.
Yeah.
And also being truthful. I mean, I gotta say, being truthful, first of all, not only is that in and of itself a good thing to do, but I don't think there really is that much of a need to say that you're highly proficient in, for example, languages that you aren't, right? Like I, for example, have a couple of live coding episodes on my YouTube channel, which I did with my friend Omer, and these were before I started writing a new book of mine called Tanmay Teaches Go. And in those live streams, I was quite literally learning the Go language as we went. Before that, I had barely ever coded in Go, but it only took a couple of projects to be able to then pick that up and say, now I can code really advanced stuff in Go, because once you've, again, learned some basic things like how unsafe pointers work in Swift and how, garbage collection works in Java and how all these different things work, you sort of are able to piece it all together and say, all right, this is Go, right? Once you get used to the syntax, at least. So, learning on the job is absolutely a thing you're going to be doing anyway, so you might as well be truthful on, your resume or whatever it is that you submit. So That is
Exactly.
definitely helpful. As a matter of fact, a follow-up question on that from Vidi Jen on YouTube asks, if we don't have any prior experience, but we do know a good number of programming languages and also machine learning, are we given, a good chance or preference for an internship? So, what matters more to you, experience or knowing lots of programming languages and different techniques?
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, it does really come down to experience because it's
Yeah.
demonstrating those applying them. But that being said, for your first, especially when you're younger and your first internship, you're not going to have any experience, and that's okay. And that's when you can really show off your learning and your knowledge in those areas.
Yeah, it's all about the experience, I gotta say, because again, programming languages you can learn
Yeah,
that on the fly mostly, right? But actually having experience applying those programming languages, I think, is completely different, right? Like
application.
I've read the whole, back when I was learning Swift, the first thing I did was read through the entire Swift documentation and watch all these tutorials, but still, there are just certain pitfalls or certain tips and tricks that you only really
Well,
get
until
when you
you do
work.
it, like, yeah,
Exactly,
exactly.
exactly.
Like anything.
Yeah, exactly. Like, when do you want to use unsafe optimizations? When do you want to use compile time only memory enforcement? Like, these things aren't just going to be documented
Yeah.
somewhere, right? You're going to need them in very specific situations or circumstances, and that's when that sort of is helpful. All right. Now, one more question from Shiva asking, sometimes you're eligible for all the conditions except the country in which you're located. In
Mm.
those situations, how do you find the perfect fit because it has its pros and cons?
Yeah, unfortunately, work authorization and visas there's no workaround. Like, there's
Yeah.
no magic solution to that. So you need to have sponsorship or be able to work in that country. And I think a lot of students think, oh, if I get the right hiring manager, if I talk to the right person, it might happen. But this is like one of these things. It's a strict rule. Like, there's
Hmm.
no bending that, right? So focus on, I know you mentioned there's a student in India. I've seen a ton of students that have interned at a company in India and then worked later on at their American counterpart, right? So I think that's also important, is just getting experience in your home country. And, the possibility of transferring over is much easier that way.
Yeah, I gotta say it's unfortunately the thing that we have the least leeway with
Yes.
is dealing with countries, because that's completely out of our hands, unfortunately.
Yep.
Um, but hopefully, of course, Shiva, you're able to find that perfect fit. And of course, if you do have any
Hmm.
more specific questions, feel free to reach out, and we'd be glad to give you some more advice
Sure.
on the live stream or after it. Our contact will be in the description. Speaking of which, Bridget, I will be asking you where folks can contact you, and we will put that in the description as well. I assume, of course, LinkedIn is a good platform, right?
LinkedIn's there. Yeah. Totally.
Wonderful, wonderful. All right, now there is another really interesting question. Cubing with Renuka. This one's a bit more technical, so we'll just keep this one quick.
Yeah.
Asking Java versus Kotlin, which one's the best for app development? Anup Kumar answered the question for me in the live stream chat. Kotlin, of course.
Gotta
But
love that.
I would add a third contender to the mix. I mean, Swift. Use
Ah,
Swift.
there's the bug.
Yep. Uh, so that's
Too funny.
that's the third contender. But yeah, I mean, first of all, thank you very much, Bridget, for answering all of these
Yeah.
questions. I know we've had, so many questions from the live stream
Been
chat,
fun.
both on LinkedIn
Love it.
and YouTube. So I'm very glad
Good.
we were able to take all of those up. And I'm so glad to be able to get your insight on this world. That's something that I definitely am not an expert at. And so it was great to get your insights. But of course, before we end our conversation today, there is another question that I have for you. Is there a closing message that you want to share with the audience?
Yeah, thanks, Tanmay, for having me on today. It's been so great interacting with all of you and so many great questions in. And if I can leave you with one thing as you're going through that job search, keep at it. It's tough. It can be frustrating at times, but it will work out. And if you put the hard work in and the effort, it will pay off and you will land your dream role. I promise. And I love to hear, like I mentioned, stay connected with me on LinkedIn. I'd love to hear how your job search is going. I'll be posting tips on there. So hope to continue the conversation over there.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Bridget. I mean, even now we're still getting so many more questions on the live
Wow.
stream chat, right? Like we're getting a question from Akshay Bakshi asking, should the focus be more on data science and algorithms and problem solving skills or building projects to seek an internship, which I guess actually comes back more fundamentally to the whole, how effective is, leak code or something like, in a hacker rank versus, actual experience. I would personally say as a developer, and this is an analogy that I like to use, is being really good at, for example, solving leak code problems, which is like a hobby almost for a lot of beginning developers now. It's great,
Yeah.
but that's like saying an Olympic swimmer would instantly be a really good Navy officer. And that doesn't necessarily translate, right?
Translate. Yeah.
So just because you're really, really good at solving those problems, because you know exactly what algorithm to use, exactly how to get the time complexity to ON, right, doesn't necessarily mean you'd be the greatest developer on a specific team. So I would say experience balance, of course, right? You don't just want lots of experience building simple projects, but it's all about that mix of having those skills, but at the same time having a lot of experience with using those skills.
Yeah, exactly. And I see a lot of people memorizing, right? Like the most commonly asked hacker rank questions. And it's like, wow, okay, you can memorize that and figure that out. But, that doesn't mean you're going to be successful on the job.
Yeah.
So definitely a balance there.
Exactly. And, exact same answer for Anoop Kumar's question, should I go for competitive programming or development? Development fundamentally, but there's certain skills that competitive programming can teach you that are important. So you don't want to be the guy that can, code a super complex algorithm in under 5 minutes in, 10 lines of C code with ON complexity because that no one can ever read, because that's not what you want to do in the enterprise, right? You want code that is explainable, maintainable, that is, easy to actually understand, and code that makes sense, while at the same time being super efficient. So that's what developers do. So then again, though, it was great to get your thoughts on this, Bridget. Of course, we will be doing some more technical insights onto this in the future as well. And, I got to say, there's so many points that I agree with today. Some things that I can even personally relate to. Like, as you mentioned, for example, people reaching out on LinkedIn. There's always so many people, reaching out and sending me emails or like linking connection requests. And for a lot of them, I unfortunately don't, have the bandwidth to be able to look at all of them. So the ones that do sort of stand out and say, oh, I saw you from your Coursera course on AI, right? Or, I really liked how you mentioned X and I would love to connect. These things really make these connections really stand out. And especially within recruiting, I mean, this is just me, but then within recruiting, I'm sure, as you mentioned, the sort of 2,000 plus, almost 3,000, requests that you've gotten, it can be difficult to filter through them and sort of find the ones that are valuable. So making sure that you have that creativity, you want to make that personal human connection, you genuinely want that, is important at the end of the day, because recruiters are humans too.
Exactly. I think we should end it on that. That was great.
Yeah. So wonderful. Thank you very much. If you have any more questions for Bridget, feel free to send that in through the comments, and I will make sure to get those answered. And of course, feel free to reach out to her on LinkedIn as well. I will have those links in the description. So thank you very much, Bridget. Thank you very much, everyone, for joining today. Make sure you join in next week on Sunday. We'll be talking about the world of travel, so it should be fun. Stay tuned. Later in the week, I'll be announcing more details on that. But this was a really fun episode. Thank you very much, Bridget, and I look forward to seeing you all next week. Goodbye.